Okay. Welcome everybody to our first Pixels and Pieces. We're glad to have all of you. We hope that we'll have all of you all semester and into the next semester. My name is Jeremy Kincaid. I am the Outreach and Programming Coordinator here. So any events that we have here, you'll be dealing with me, which is why I put my card in the thing. If you have any problems with any events or you have any questions, I'm the person to contact. So that's the easiest way to get answers to everything. I hope did everyone get their card swiped and put down some form of email so they can be added to the Facebook group? Awesome. All right, so in your packets, you have a 2-page sheet. That is going to have a lot of the information, what we're going to be doing this today, this semester, and the start of next semester, in getting us from the concept all the way to beginning of marketing and production and that sort of stuff. In that, you'll see a lot of information about a judging that will be happening if you stick with us and you produce any kind of product and you want some support in getting it published. You can submit it to us on the day that's highlighted, and we'll take a look at it, and we'll choose 1 or 2 or 3 depending on the quality of them, and help those people with free 3D printing, 3 large-scale printing of a board for a beta prototype that will then help you take to places to get beta tested and start heading towards the marketing and production end of game design. I've also put in each of your packets a little blue sheet. That is from the factory here. It's in Willis Library. They are the ones that do 3D printing and large-scale printing and all sorts of other cool stuff. On that is their schedule of workshops. So if you want to learn how to make 3D models that can be printed and that sort of stuff, there's a lot of classes in there that will be very useful. Specifically, anything that says Blender is going to be learning how to make 3D models. Then, of course, the graphic design on the 21st is useful if you're looking at learning how to do art for your games and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool classes that if you want additional help on the production and art, they will be able to help you with that. So I guess we'll just get into it. Today we have speaker Sean McCoy here with us today. He is one of the creators of 2 Rooms and a Boom. He works for Tuesday Night Games, and he's going to talk to us about game design in general.
Hey, so like Jeremy said, my name's Sean, and I make this game 2 Rooms and a Boom, which we just released for sale at Gen Con in August of this year, which we kickstarted a couple years ago. It was sort of a long road getting it here, but now we have it, which is really cool, and it's selling today. The big thing I just wanted to talk about today is game design and like game design as a concept from the beginning, like how to think and how to approach designing your game. A little bit about me. So I got into games when I was a kid, when I was like 8 or 9. Super nerdy, like comic book kid, that kind of thing. And I played a game called Legendary Heroes, which a friend of mine's dad had designed as like an alternative to Dungeons & Dragons. I played that, I played Magic the Gathering, I played chess with my dad, I played D&D, all that sort of stuff. But this friend of my dad's, this guy named Brian Pope, made this game called Legendary Heroes, and he printed out all these booklets with all the pictures and all this sort of stuff, and I would spend so much time just like making my character and all of that, and it was tons of fun. After that, I moved to Austin to go to school, and I met up with these, they call themselves the Renegade Role Players of Austin, and they were these older guys in their late 30s and early 40s, headed by a guy named Misha, who was like a transplant from Katrina. He lived in New Orleans, and they showed us all these games we'd never heard of, these like independent role-playing games like Mountain Witch or Polaris, older games that we'd never heard of like Cyberpunk 2020, things like that. And they even got me to go to my first convention, Origins in Columbus. We like drove there from Austin. It was like a 14-hour drive. We ate nothing but White Castle the entire time, and like went and saw like there's this huge board gaming community that we weren't aware of. After that, I moved back to Dallas, and I started getting into freelance graphic design. And my friend's dad, Brian Pope, was working on a new game like 10 years later, and this game was called Mage Wars. And I went over and played the game, and it was like Magic the Gathering, but you could move around on a board. It was sort of answering the question, you know, what if you were playing these wizards and mages, but everything felt like it would feel in real life. If you shot a fireball, it would go like over in a direction, cover area, and like hurt somebody. And I thought it was really cool, and so I made some prototype boards for him and sent them over to him. And he was like, oh my god, that's really cool. Do you want to come and work for me? And so I worked there at Starbucks for a couple of years, then eventually transitioned over full-time, where we worked and finished the game Mage Wars, which is now like in stores. While I was working there, we started playtesting in a way to sort of get the game ready to ship. And I met this guy named Alan Girding in Vegas at a convention. And Alan and I hit it off really well. He was one of our playtesters. He lives in Cleveland. And he was getting married in the summer, and he was like, hey, you should come out. I'm going to have an engagement party. We're going to like play games all weekend. We cover the 4th of July. You should come out. I was like, okay, cool. So I came out and I played a couple games I'd never played before. One of them was Werewolf, and one of them was The Resistance, if any of you guys have heard of those things. Pretty common party games, like an informed minority versus an uninformed majority. A couple of you are werewolves. You know you're werewolves, nobody else knows you're werewolves, and every night you're killing people who have their eyes closed. And every morning, everyone's arguing about who the werewolves are. Has anyone here played this? Werewolf Mafia? Okay, cool. So I played that for the first time, and I was like, oh my god, this is awesome! And I wanted to come up with a game that sort of emulated that experience. So the first thing I thought of was like, it would be cool to make a game that was sort of like hostage negotiation. Like you were a negotiator outside a building, and there were bad guys and good guys inside the building, and you were trying to find out who was who, but you couldn't tell who was on the other side. So I talked to Alan. I said, is there something here? And he said, well, first off, is this something for me? Because he had been designing his own games for a while. Is this something for me? Is this something you want my help on, or do you want to do this together? I was like, yeah, let's do it together. It'd be fun. And so we started working on it, and we came up with our first prototype for 2 Rooms and a Boom. We took it to a convention called Protospiel, where people bring their prototypes of their own games. And we played it, and a couple people liked it, and a publisher approached us and said, hey, like, I'd publish this game if you guys were interested, which was crazy. We brought it back to my company, Arcane Wonders, where we were working on Mage Wars, and they gave us an offer. People did Resistance, made us an offer, and eventually we just decided, you know what, if everyone's this interested, we'll just do it on our own, and Kickstarter. Since then, we Kickstarted the game. It did really well on Kickstarter. We've started selling it. It's done well there. We've got a new game coming out. But that's sort of my background as to how I got into game design and how I got into game design publishing. From like playing as a kid to just wanting to be involved from an illustrative standpoint or a graphic design standpoint to now as like a designer and publisher. So first things first, anybody can design games. It sounds really complicated when you have like a full game like Roll for the Galaxy or Lost Monster or Arctic Scavengers, which is really good, to look at a full and complete finished game and think like there's just too many moving pieces, there's too many problems to solve to really get involved. But anyone can do it, you just have to start small. You start with a small idea. For instance, like we could take a game like Tic-Tac-Toe, which is pretty simple, right? Like you have X's, you have O's, and we can add or subtract to the pre-existing sort of rules of the game. Every time you place like an X, we could roll a die, or we could draw a card. Our opponent could do the same thing. We could compare those numbers. In fact, a lot of game designers I know started off this way. They started off fixing games that they didn't like, that they felt were broken or didn't make any sense, or tweaking games that they loved to add more or take away things that they didn't like to. Game design is really all about problem solving. In fact, games are about problem solving too. A game presents a problem to you, the player, and the winner is the person who solves that. right? And in its very basic form, any game you know is about solving a problem. So whether you're playing solo, like in Solitaire, you're playing co-op, like in, what's a good co-op game? Pandemic. Whether you're playing competitively, like in all games, or whether you're playing on teams, like in Two Rooms and a Boom, there's always a problem to be solved, and the team that solves it, or the person that solves it, is going to be the winner. So my first advice would be start there. Start with an interesting problem to solve in your game. Think about something that would be hard to solve, and start with that. This is the way you win the game. If you can do X, you'll win. Then from there, we get components, or what you can do on your turn, or what we call the rules or mechanics of the game. But all those are just ways in which you're going to allow the players to solve the puzzle. So the puzzle is, you have to get a ball through a net, but you can only use your legs, you can't use your arms, right? Like that's soccer, right? So we limit what the players can do in order to solve the problem, and those become the rules of the game. Does that make sense? If anybody ever has any questions, just throw up your hand. You guys are in school, you know how that works. So things like components, like cards, or dice, or what are some other cool components? Meeples, or miniatures, the boards, everything like that. All of those are just tools that you give to the players to sort of interact with or solve the problem that you've laid out for them on a very sort of mechanic, basic level. So it'll be pretty easy. To design a game, you'll sort of create this problem. You give the players options or things that they can do to solve that problem. Those will be the rules, and then you'll give them components to use or manipulate to either stand for who they are, or what they're doing, or to keep track of how close everyone is to solving the problem, etc. So those are the basic parts of game design. Problems, and then tools used to solve the problem. The other big thing, which I'm a huge fan of, is theme, or the story, or the world that your game is sort of set in. In fact, most game designers come from one or two approaches. They come from either a theme approach, theme first, or a mechanics approach, the rules first. And what that means is, like, a designer like me, like with Two Rooms and a Boom, what I wanted to capture was the experience of not having information about somebody in another location and trying to figure out who was good or who was bad based on this limited interaction you could have with them. That was the experience I wanted to create. I wanted you to feel like you were a hostage negotiator. Now, we strayed away far from that in creating Two Rooms and a Boom, but that's where it started for me. My business partner, Alan, who's the co-designer, usually starts with the mechanics first. He says, what would be fun things to do? What would be fun ways to interact with other players, or each other, or the game itself? And then from there, at the end, we say, oh, you know, this game would fit like a stockbroker sort of theme, or this game would fit sort of a fantasy theme, or whatever. Those are the major ways that different designers approach it, and you guys will find your own or some mixture, right? Like you'll have a little bit of a theme idea and a mechanic to go with it. For instance, like if any of you have played any stealth games like Scotland Yard or what was the big one that just came out, Spectre Ops. In stealth games, usually the main mechanic in board gaming is to have like a grid, almost like you'd have in like Battleship. And you have like A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So this is your board or your territory or whatever. And you, the spy or the ninja or the assassin, is running around here, killing people and doing your thing. And then everybody else is usually playing guards, people who are trying to catch you. So what the difference is the spy has to keep his information secret. He's writing down, okay, on turn 1, I'm in square 1, and on turn 2, I'm going to move to B3, etc. The other players, though, their information is public. So they're a guard here, a guard here, a guard here. And based on sort of the consequences of your actions, they're trying to find you. And this is sort of the way stealth games have been done for a long time. And there's one major flaw, which is that you could very easily miscalculate how far you're supposed to go. Like if you can move 3 or 4 spaces, or it's a random amount, you think you're moving like this, and you write it down, but really you had to move like that, or there was an obstacle in your way, and so you have to say, wait, nope, sorry, I'm not there, I'm actually over here, sorry, whoops, sorry, let's go back a couple turns. It happens all the time in these sort of stealth games. Different games do a better job of addressing it, but it's sort of a flaw in this sort of system. So at one point I thought like, oh, what would be really cool is if the bad guys had pieces, but so did the good guy. But only one of these pieces is the real you. The rest are figments of the other players' imaginations, or sounds that they heard, or shadows that they misconstrued. And so now there's no question about where everyone's moving, but there's still the same sort of feeling or question about, is this the right person? Am I chasing like a shadow or something like that? It still has that same feeling of stealth. So for me, like in this instance, I came up with a mechanic first, but it was still very much informed by the experience that I wanted to create, which is that of like a stealth game. Other famous designers like Reiner Knizia is really famous for having mechanics for games that are math-based or whatever, and then pitching them to publishers and they're saying, well, this is all well and good, but this is a cowboy game and we're really looking for like a Cthulhu kind of game. And he'll just sort of be like 1 second and go back and sort of scratch out things and come back and he's like, all right, I've got a Cthulhu game for you. So don't be afraid to approach it from either side of the spectrum. Just find what works for you, what you like to work with. I like to work with the experience. Some people like to work with mechanics. The big thing I would say though here is start small. Start with the smallest idea you possibly can that's still fun to you. In product design, they call it MVP, minimum viable product, or MLP, your minimum lovable product. What this means is, what's the smallest you can get your game to be and still be fun? Because there's always going to be time to add tons of components, right? There's always going to be time to put beautiful art on it, great graphic design. There's always going to be time to dress that up with good marketing, things like that. But at the very core, if your game isn't fun, those things won't come. I think Magic the Gathering is a really good example. Because it's a really fun game that's gotten popular, more and more popular, and you go buy it at Walmart today, it's making tons of money. Magic relies on the concept that drawing cards and finding out what cards you got, and then making a choice between those two cards as to what you wanted to do was innately fun. That there was sort of a lottery element to drawing and not knowing what you would get. And it's true at its very basic level, that's why poker's fun. Like not knowing what you're going to get and then finding out and then having to make a choice based on that is fun to a lot of us. Now you add on top of that, artists are getting paid $1,000 per drawing, and like a global company like Hasbro distributing it at this point. And it seems obvious, like, well, we could never do that. But it's very basic core. In the basement, when Richard Garfield was working on it, it was fun just drawing cards that said, hey, you can do this or you can do this, and having to make a choice between those two things. As an exercise for me, to try and work more on my strength and mechanics, because like I said, I'm a theme-first kind of guy, I worked on a little game called Duel, which is what we call a micro game. Have any of you guys played Love Letter or heard of Love Letter? Yeah. Love Letter? Okay, so recently there's this sort of trend coming out of Japan to create these really tiny games. See if we have any. It's in here. To create these really tiny games that only rely on a few components and a really elegant sort of rule system in order to get their point across. Yeah, Love Letter. Love Letter was one of them, designed by a guy named Seiji Kanai, and now it's really blowing up. You can get Adventure Time Love Letter, Batman Love Letter, Victorian Love Letter, or Japanese Love Letter. So people are really liking it, but it only has 16 cards in the entire game. So playing this, I was like, oh my god, that's so awesome. I want to do something like that. But I had no idea where to start with mechanics. So literally, what I did was I took this notebook and I wrote down all the things I could think of that you could do with cards. As an exercise, let's come up with a list of something. So what are some things you can do with a deck of cards?
Draw a card.
You can draw a card. What else can we do?
Shuffle.
Shuffle.
Discard.
Discard, yep. What else? What do we know from other card games?
Flip or uncover.
You can flip or uncover. That's a good one. Uncover. Anyone else?
Sideways.
Turn it sideways, or as we call it, magic tapping.
You're gonna run into legal trouble.
Yeah.
Can't say that.
What else can we do with cards?
I don't know if it's the same as draw, but you can collect sets.
Yeah, set collection is a huge part of a lot of games.
Like,
Play them, right? You play a card, you set it down,
Trade.
trade, you can give a card to a player, they can give you a card back. What else? Let's start thinking weird. What are things you could do with cards that you don't really think of as things you do with cards in a game? Like, what can you physically do with a
I
card?
could tear a card up.
You could tear a card up.
Interesting. Legacy love letter.
Let's You can tear a card up.
Build a tower.
You can build, yeah. There was a huge game that came out. It wasn't huge. It was huge, like at one convention, called Flower Fall. And what it was you were trying to make these flower patches, and you'd all have your own flowers on cards, and you had to sit back from a table, and you had to throw them, and you could, as long as you connected it to your other cards, you had this big patch of flowers, and whoever had the most flowers won. I thought it would have been better if it was called Daisy Chain, but that's beside the point. So you can throw cards. Anything else? Okay, so this is a good list. So literally, I made a list of all of these things that I could possibly think of for a game, and then I gave myself some limitations. One thing I think you guys will find in sort of creative endeavors is that limitations are your friend. A lot of the great thing about like writing or building or creating is that the like possibilities are endless. But for me, I found that I can't start a project or I can't work on a project until I give myself some real constraints, that I give myself a box of what is not going to be the game. And then I find that like my brain will work overtime to actually fill in that space in the middle and find everything that can be that game. Like a screenplay needs to be 90 pages or less, right? Books have word counts that you need to reach, or certain things that need to happen. And on top of that, like even in marketing, what's just as important as your target audience is your not target audience. Who is the guy you are specifically not trying to reach? And you'll find that's true in board games as well. In fact, for Terms in a Boom, you guys might remember like the big influences for this game were Werewolf and The Resistance, okay? Social deduction, hidden role games, much like this, but there were problems we wanted to solve and different people we wanted to target with our game. For instance, the worst part about Werewolf, if you guys have played, is that people die every turn and they have to leave the game. They have to go sit outside, they have to go wait till the game's over. It's called player elimination. Well, we didn't think that was very fun because it's kind of interesting. If you make it to the end of the game, there's almost no better feeling than being that last person left alive, having lied to everybody else for the last 30, 45 minutes, and finally winning. That's an amazing experience. But conversely, being the first person killed at the very beginning of the game after having experienced anything and not getting to play it all is one of the worst feelings. So there's a huge gap in the experience the players are having, which is rough because that means coming out of it, you're going to have a wide variety of what people can or cannot feel or experience in the game, which sucks. On top of that, Werewolf requires a moderator to play. There's one person every time who's going to have to be the host, who's not going to get to play, and that's a rough thing to have to be every time as well. So we wanted to solve those two problems. On top of that, if any of you guys have ever played The Resistance, has anyone here played The Resistance? You have? Okay, cool. The Resistance is a similar game. There's spies, and then there's the Resistance, and the spies have infiltrated the Resistance. Now what happens in that game is nobody knows who's on whose team except the bad guys. The spies know that they're spies, so they have perfect information. They know I'm a spy, you're a spy, everyone else is not a spy. But nobody else knows anything. And in fact, the only information you really have to go on, unless you want to get into whether or not you can tell people's tells, is voting. You get to vote on who you think gets to go on certain missions. Now, there's no player elimination and there's no moderation, which is great. So solve those two problems from Werewolf. But what we found is, since no one can trust each other, Resistance players tend to be a lot more bloodthirsty. And most people end up leaving the game feeling like, why didn't you make it clear to me we were on the same team? I thought you were a spy, you were Resistance. So you feel very let down that you were not able to convince your own teammates that you were even on their team. Now, Resistance is hugely popular and it's a great game, but we wanted to solve that problem too. We wanted to create a game where you could build a team and that you would start to trust each other more and more as time went on, as opposed to trusting each other less and less as time went on. So in our game, you have your card that says, hey, you're red team or blue team. However, you get to share your card with people or show your card to people and say, hey, I'm on red team, hey, I'm on blue team, and you get to engender the trust or garner trust of your teammates and build a strategy. Now, we also knew that these games wouldn't work if there was no pressure, and if everybody could figure out whose team everybody was on by the end of the game, there would be nothing left to solve. So we added a timer. Our games are 15 minutes long. Each round is timed, and that created that pressure. Anyway, the point is, we knew specifically going into it a few of our limitations. 1, we weren't going to have a moderator. 2, there was going to be a time limit. 3, we wanted all the players to be able to play the entire game. And 4, we wanted the game to be team building, not trust breaking. So by setting those limitations for ourselves very, very early on, it became easier and easier to make design decisions. Because we could say, well, does what we're doing make the team, help with team building, or does it hurt team building? Does what we're doing require there to be a moderator or not require there to be a moderator? So when you come up against decisions that you'll have to make, and game design is all about making decisions, we had a guiding principle to go on. So you want to start small. We wanted to start small with a game that's like Werewolf of the Resistance. And then you want to very quickly put some limitations on yourself. And the great thing is, you can always expand those limitations if you feel like you need to, but without those limitations, you'll go nowhere. I want to write a book about a guy who does something. Well, that guy could do anything, right? But when you start to say, I'm going to write a mystery novel, and I'm going to write a mystery novel in the legal genre, there are certain trappings and tropes that go along with that genre that help with your scope. Now, in there, you can do creative things. I'm going to do, any of your favorite movies with great twists are always playing on your notion of the conventions of that genre, right? You expect A to happen, but in this, B is going to happen. However, if you don't expect A to happen, then the twist doesn't affect you at all, right? So that's what we're talking about here, is setting up some clear expectations for yourself and for the game. Any questions? Cool. Okay, so let's talk about mechanics for a little bit more. So you've got your game idea, you want to make a pirate game, or you want to make a game that involves this equation that you came up with, or these rules that you came up with. You've got it, you've put some limitations on yourself, you know what your genre is, you know what games your game is like, you know what games your game is not like. For instance, if you guys haven't heard these terms before, there's 2 big terms in board gaming, Ameritrash and Eurogaming. Eurogaming is what people call it's not really you guys think, yeah. It's like you have 4 peasants, and those 4 peasants work in 5 fields, and each field yields this many bales of hay, and then you use that hay to make bread, and then you feed that bread to your army, and your army goes and fights another nation, and it's all this sort of, they call worker placement. You have 4 workers, you put them here and here, and that's what they call Eurogaming. It's a huge genre of games. And then they call things that are more direct competition, like Magic the Gathering, like, I'm gonna put a fireball on you! That's like Ameritrash, right? And different players are drawn to those types of games. People who are more inherently competitive are drawn to what we call Ameritrash games. People who want to sort of work by themselves, like play solitaire, those are Euro games, right? We're all building our own kingdom or fiefdom or whatever, and at the end of the game, we'll find out who won. We knew there were types of people who wouldn't like our game, and there are types of people who wouldn't like our game. Our game, you're on your feet the entire time, it's 15 minutes or less, and you have to be social. So that was going to attract certain kinds of players that don't like to sit down, be playing a board game for 30, 45 minutes, that kind of thing. So we knew what we were aiming for there. So we set up these sort of limitations for ourselves. Now, as we started to design the game, there's 110 unique characters in here, and each of those characters have different abilities, and they all had to have different illustrations. Here's a problem we came into a lot. You have an idea, right? And here is good and bad. You think your idea is somewhere between good and bad, and you think about it and you think, man, that's a really good idea, or I think this idea could work. And so you work to improve it, right? So you take your idea from here to here, and you think, man, I really improved my idea from the last one. We've really worked on it, we've really focused. Or for instance, this happened a lot. I did all the illustration for all the cards in the game. So we would say like, we have a card for the clown. What's a good iconic image for like a clown? Well, it's like a red nose or frizzy hair. So say, okay, let's go with like the frizzy hair. Boom, idea. I do a drawing of frizzy hair and would say, the hair's not frizzy enough. And like, it needs a better silhouette. And it doesn't make good use of the negative space on the card. So we improved the card, and now it's here. So that's how we do things all the time, and that's not bad. You have an idea and you improve it. But what we're working on at our company is to hold ideas lightly and know that there's always more ideas coming up, and to do what we call divergent thinking, which is that before we commit to one idea for one illustration, this is what the clown's going to look like, let's try and draw the best clown we can, or this is the best mechanic. We brainstorm a bunch of ideas and then compare them. Because what's going to happen a lot of times in game design is that you have a mechanic that you invented the game to showcase, or you have a piece of art that you invented the game to showcase, but you get this tunnel vision and you have no idea how it actually compares to other ideas. I'm a big believer in like the process, not the product. They talk about this in architecture a lot. Like what you need to get good at is designing buildings. Don't worry so much about the building at the end, but there's a process that you're trying to perfect or improve for yourself. Game design is the same way, that you will develop your own internal process for what you think is good and what you think is bad. And for us, this is part of it. Come up with a lot of ideas early on when you're not emotionally attached to them. So for instance, for the clown, it's like, well, it could be the nose, or it could be a clown car, it could be the frizzy hair, it could be the patterns, or it could be a jester's hat. There's so many different icons or images that could go with that art that it's foolish to start with one and then just try to improve it. Because what we have now is that we have this scattering. We can actually say like, actually, you know what, now that I see all of these things, this is the best one. And let's improve that one. Does that make sense? It's a weirdly simple concept, but it comes up all the time. For me as a graphic designer, I will get logo ideas or contracts from clients that say like, hey, we want X, and we want it to be bright and fun and sunny, and so I'll get on my sketchbook and I'll do something bright and fun and sunny, and then I'll send it back to them, and they'll say, cool, but we don't mean like that. We want it bright and fun and sunny, but we also want it like warm and friendly. And so I go back and I do another design. But the truth is, if I had done this huge dump at the very beginning of all the different things or all the different ideas that I could have, we wouldn't have been caught up in that situation where I have to keep going back and starting over from scratch, because you just have a much better lay of the land. So anyway, in board games and in game design and in video games, it will behoove you to hold your ideas lightly, right? To know that you're always going to have more ideas at the end of the day, that the well is not going to run dry, like this is not your one only idea. In fact, you find that the more often you return to the blank page, the easier and easier it gets. And if you trust yourself and you're confident enough to say, hey, this idea is not working, let's just throw it away and move on to something else, you will come up with more stuff. So that's been really, really huge for us. The other big thing, and I was talking to a friend of mine. I have a couple friends who are in comic books, and they write comics for a living for like Dark Horse, and somebody's doing something for Marvel, and that kind of stuff. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, hey, I just picked up this comic the other day, it was really good. What are you reading these days? Like, what's good? You're on the inside. And she was like, oh, I'm not reading anything. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, well, I already know all those people, and I don't read, and I gotta focus on my own stuff, and it's all not that great anyway. And I was so sad because in our industry, it works totally differently. If you want to learn, like the easiest, quickest way to learn mechanics and learn theme and learn what works and doesn't work is to be playing these games. To play good games, to play bad games, to play games that are experiments on Kickstarter, or print and play games that are just like get out there and play games. Play board games, play video games, play apps, play whatever is out there, because that's the only way you're really going to get the vocabulary, the language of board gaming or game design into you. is to have played a lot of games. In fact, when we were talking about what are the things you could do with cards, almost all of our examples are things we have done with cards before, right? But it would be totally different if I said something like, let's list all the things you can do with a painted miniature of a tank, right? Because I'm guessing that not many of you are huge war gamers. But that's how you sort of become aware of what's going on and what's acceptable or not acceptable. A big game, for instance, is Dixit. Has anybody here played Dixit? Awesome. So Dixit's really cool because its mechanics are super ambiguous. If I'm getting this right, in Dixit, it's where you have a word. Is that right?
It's surreal art. It's like surreal art.
It's surreal art, right? But you're trying to use that surreal art to describe something or describe a word.
You say a word that's describing it. Like people, you take turns. Like you'll describe the card kind of.
Right.
And everybody else tries to play a card that seems similar to
That
that.
seems similar to
And then
that.
everybody tries to guess which card was the person whose turn it was to say the word. And then.
So the word might be orange, and we'd all play cards that we think get that across.
Right.
And then we try to pick out which was the original one.
And you try to be semi-vague because if everybody guesses the card, then the person who put the card out doesn't get any points.
It's too obvious, you
And
lose.
then alternatively, if you make it so obscure that nobody guesses it, you also don't get, the person who played the card doesn't get any points. And there's some other scoring stuff. But
It's a very vague, ambiguous game, right? Because it's all based on what you can get away with and descriptions and things like that. And it's hugely successful. And now, the weird thing is, it's being mimicked a lot in game design right now. Mysterium. There's a game that just came out called Mysterium, which is basically Dixit meets Clue. In Mysterium, I'm a ghost, and I'm trying to tell you who killed me, where, and with what. But I can only use these abstract, creepy pieces of art to describe it to you. It's literally like I'm a ghost saying like, there's a blue room with sharks in it. And you're saying like, I guess it was an aquarium? I don't know. But you'll see that happening more and more and more, but only because Dixit came out. So now that people are thinking like, oh, we can do that, much like Love Letter. Love Letter was really good at saying like, we can make games with 16 cards and they'll still sell. People jump onto that. Another great one that I like to talk about is the deck builder. So this was pretty big in board gaming. For a long time, like we're kind of in like a renaissance of board gaming right now. Like everybody's coming out with board games. You're all here talking about game design. Kickstarter's huge, that kind of stuff. But it wasn't like that for a long, long time. It would not be uncommon for somebody to just own a copy of Cards Against Humanity, right? Like at this point. But 10 years ago, it would be insanely uncommon for somebody to have like a Magic the Gathering deck. So for a long time, the way you would play a game like Magic is you would have to go to the store and you buy a bunch of packs of cards, like 13 cards for like $5, spend all your money, and then from there you would construct a deck that you would go and play with against other people at the comic book store or whatever. Then Dominion came out. And you can buy Dominion, I think, at like Walmart at this point. But in Dominion, you could buy one game, and what would happen is, in that game, you'd have a spread of cards out all like on the table, and you would all take turns building your deck from these cards. You'd buy certain cards, and then you'd play cards that would let you buy more cards. And then basically what you would generate is an engine for creating points, right? We talked about problem solving. In Dominion, the problem that you have is you want to have the most points at the end of the game. However, the cards that are worth points don't do anything, so they take up room in your deck. So it muddles your engine. It would be like if I was to say like, you know, who's going to drive the farthest in this car, but you have only two things you can put in your tank, water and gas. And so like you need to get as far as possible, but you're always having to put water in your car, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so Dominion sort of invented this idea of the deck builder. And it was kind of cool, but it was kind of bland. You had a marketplace, you bought knights and houses and fields, and you generated points for your fiefdom. So it like worked, and it's really fun, but thematically, it was kind of boring. After Dominion, there came a game called Thunderstone, and in Thunderstone, you used the exact same concept. You built stuff, but what you built were adventures and adventure parties, and what you fought against were dungeons, right? So that's pretty common in the board game world. After that, there was, I want to say, Ascension, and in Ascension, we could actually play against each other, and we're buying cards from the center again, and then we're fighting monsters. After that, we have the Marvel deck building games, where it's actually co-op now, and we're building a team of Marvel superheroes, Spider-Man, Wolverine, whatever, and we're fighting against all the bad guys, right? It's the same thing. And then after that, even now, the huge one right now is called Star Realms. I build a fleet of spaceships, you build a fleet of spaceships, and then we fight our spaceships against each other. So again, all of this just came from the fact that somebody was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was a game where I didn't have to keep buying packs? And in fact, I could build my deck like right here and right now. I could spend 60 bucks on a game once as opposed to 30 bucks on a game a month forever. And it really blew up. In fact, another really cool one is Arctic Scavengers. We're all in an Arctic tundra, and it's a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and there are very few resources, so we're all going and trying to build our deck for our team of survivors to stay alive the longest. And on top of that, we're fighting against each other to survive. So the deck building concept turned out really, really well. In fact, I think Boss Monster's a little bit of a deck building game too. This is selling like crazy. You're building a 8-bit dungeon, and at the end, the Boss Monster, you are there, and you're just trying to lure heroes into your dungeon to die so you can collect points. All this to say, one, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to design good games. All of those games I just listed are really good games and really fun games, and they sell and people play them. What you have to do is solve interesting problems and make sure that your limitations stand out, that you target someone. You're making sure that someone specific is going to play and enjoy your game. I think, maybe from the Patriot, that Mel Gibson movie, but the idea of aim small, miss small really applies in any kind of design you're going to do. Aim at one target consumer. I made a game that my girlfriend would love. I made a game that my grandmother would love. Because the more specific you are, the more you can target one person, you'll find out the more universal you end up being. It's kind of weird how that works. Let's see here. So I talked about theme first or mechanics first in games, and you guys will find like your own way to deal with that. Like a lot of things, the elegance is in that tension in the games that really sort of find a balance between giving you a good theme and giving you a good gameplay experience. For example, King of Tokyo. I love having all these board games here because it makes it really easy to come up with examples. King of Tokyo by Richard Garfield, the guy who made Magic the Gathering, is an insanely successful, hugely popular game where you play monsters from monster movies like in Japan who are battling over Tokyo. I'm King Kong, you're Godzilla, and we're going to fight. The mechanics for this game are Yahtzee. You're just playing Yahtzee. And what that means is like you roll 3 claws and you get to attack, you roll 3 hearts, you get to heal, you roll 3 threes, and you get 3 points, that kind of thing. Why did I bring up King of So mechanically, like you would think like Yahtzee doesn't really fit. Yahtzee doesn't make any sense for a game about monsters. But when you're playing it, all those rolls that you're doing, you're going, I'm gonna smash all of you guys. No, now I'm the King of Tokyo. When you're playing it, you actually feel like giant monsters battling over the fate of, Tokyo. And so it's really weird, but you only get there by playing and practicing things like that. I played a really experimental game. I was at a show called XOXO's Fest in Portland about a month ago called And Maybe They Won't Kill You. And it's about Ferguson and police and empathizing and that kind of stuff. It's mechanics light, meaning that what happens is there's a sidewalk and there's a moderator who has a booklet and there's you, the person, and they have you put on a hoodie and you have a frustration meter, and we're gonna walk to the store and we're gonna walk back home in our like poor, broken down neighborhood. And every step I take, somebody's gonna read out a scenario. They're gonna say, you're walking down the street and there's some people in a car and they lock their door. Do you want to say something or do you want to say nothing? And those are the only 2 options I have. I say, I don't want to say anything. They say, cool, raise your frustration by 1 and move on to the next step. Or I could say, I want to say something. And he'll say, okay, cool. What would you like to say? And so in my own words, I can confront this situation, this sort of awkward situation between people. And then he's going to roll a die, add my current frustration to it, and tell me what happens. Really cool experience, really very fun. But you can see as a game, it's very, very simple, right? You have the choice to say something or say nothing. You have just one choice. And then mechanically, you're just going to add a number to a die roll and then read from a script. But it's heavy, heavy, heavy on the theme. It's an immersive, experiential game that's really going to put you in the mindset of what it's like to be somebody in a broken down neighborhood confronting, you know, violence and crime in sort of your own neighborhood and that kind of thing. My proclivities kind of lie in that direction. I get really interested in showing somebody an experience. When I want to design a heist game, I don't want to design a game where we like take cards from each other. I want to design a game that feels like I'm in an Ocean's 11 movie. That's what I want to do. So, basically, my point there is that you want to find that tense sweet spot. You want to find that spot where you feel like you're having that experience, but it's not shoved down your throat. It's not clunky. It's not chunky. And I'm trying to think of a game that, all these games are really good because why have bad games in your library? Let's see here.
I specifically pulled this set as things that can be played in an hour. So
Yeah.
you might not find anything too heavy.
These are all games that, yeah, we love. But the only way you get that, the only way you can find where that sweet spot is, where that tension is by playtesting. Specifically what we call blind playtesting. If you take any like psychology courses or anything like that and learn about blinds and double blinds and whatever, the biggest, best feedback you're going to get is from people who don't know you and don't care about you at all. And there are groups for that I have like written down and we can talk about later. But game design in general, both video game design or board game design or whatever, is all about getting your game in front of people who are going to play it and have fun. It is not something you can perfect in your head before you get it out to people. Now that being said, like bringing a game to people, it's like, you draw cards and I don't know, you roll dice, we'll just see how it goes. Isn't the greatest experience for your playtesters, and you'll find yourself running out of playtesters really quick. But what it does mean is this is not your novel. This isn't something you need to work on alone for a long time. You need to get that minimum viable product out, that first playtest prototype copy out as soon as possible, get it in front of people, and make sure that they're playing it, and get that feedback. Because again, it's one of those things that you can only see when people are playing it. You can only see when whether people are having a good time or not based on actually playing. Okay. Some resources that we found that have been really helpful are, first off, a website called Game Crafter. And what you can do on Game Crafter is you can go and pick out your components, upload your art files, all this sort of stuff, and they will ship you like a prototype copy of your board game. It's pretty cool. So you can say like, I want 3 decks of cards, these are the images on one of the decks of cards, I want this many dice, I want a game board like this, blah, 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 and you get your prototype. The big thing I'm trying to say with these resources, by the way, is that like, we are in a maker world. Like, you can build pretty much anything you want at this point. Games should work on index cards from the very beginning. Like we talked about, like at their most basic core level, they should be fun. However, you now have the ability, once you've gotten that core game done, to actually go out and make it a reality, and you should get used to that, because real artists ship. You want to finish something and then iterate. You want to finish something and then iterate. Get your product done, no matter how bad it is or how not fun it seems to you, and then make changes. Don't leave your thing languishing forever in this sort of developmental cycle. Say, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to be done, and that's a game that's not very good, because you find you learn so much more between products than you do during products. You work on this game and you sort of figure it out, and then you're done, and then you have this time to gestate and you work on a new project, and now all of a sudden everything sinks in, like, man, we did this last time and that wasn't good. We did this last time and it didn't make any sense. So finishing is the important part here. Anyway, more resources. There's a website called GameIcons.net, and what they put together are free vector icons, everything from like fireballs to health points to dice to cards, whatever. So if you're not an artist, that's okay. Somebody out there is making free, good art for you that's scalable at any size for your, pirated copy of Photoshop or whatever, so that you can focus more on getting your product made and less on worrying about whether or not it's going to be presentable. Everybody who hears, yes?
What was that?
GameIcons.net. I think it might be game-icons, but Game Icons, you'll find it. Everybody's heard of Kickstarter, right? Okay, cool. Kickstarter is a great and terrifying experience. I think last year I was talking about how great an experience it is, and this year I can talk about how terrifying an experience it was. We made a decent chunk of change. We made $100,000 on Kickstarter, which is huge. Although not as huge as we thought it was, and certainly not as huge as it is now that we know how big board gaming is on Kickstarter. But essentially it means like, you know, I'm a graphic designer, Alan's a psychology professor, like this is our secondary job, but like now it's a real viable thing. Like we're selling 20, 30 copies a day on Amazon. We're talking to Hasbro about a licensed version of Rooms in a Boom, and we're talking about putting it in like Barnes & Noble, Target, that kind of thing. So like the distance between you and the consumer is shorter than it's ever been or probably ever going to be until we have this like water cubes that just shoot out matter. So make use of that. Like connect with your audience, make friends, build a fan base or player group, that kind of stuff. GIMP, if you guys have ever heard of it, is like a free alternative to Photoshop. That's great. And I think even on Google+, the archaic, dying social network, it's got a really vibrant board game community because of Google Hangouts, right? There's even a thing called Roll20, I think it's called. Yeah, Roll20. And so I have friends who build their prototypes entirely in Roll20. They could come up with card decks, dice, things like that. What it'll do is we can all be connected on a Google Hangout, and we can play the prototype game using what I've built in Roll20. There's a group here in Dallas Games Marathon. There's a group in Columbus, Cabs, in Cleveland, Bogadab. I know all this because my partner lives in Ohio. But there are groups that want to do nothing but playtest games that people have come up with and give them feedback. They are angry, nerdy people, but that's what they want to do. And you need that feedback. You really do if your game's ever going to get anywhere. So there are tons of resources out there. Anyway, that's really all I have. If I could leave you with anything today, it would be ship and iterate. Finish something, move on, start small, and then think in this divergent way. Come up with a lot of ideas and know that no matter what, there's always going to be more fuel in the tank if you run out. Don't be afraid to throw out what you have and start fresh. Any questions? Yes?
So keep it simple and small. When you're talking about a deck, how many is normally the average?
So, like, from a manufacturing standpoint, manufacturers think of decks as 54 cards, 54 to like 60 cards. They think in terms of playing cards. Since playing cards were the first things to ever come out, your manufacturers print on these giant sheets of paper, or in our case, plastic, and then they have these dies that punch out your card and shuffle them into decks. So you want to be thinking in multiples of decks of playing cards, which is great for game design because you can go buy a deck of playing cards for $1 and write on top of it or throw a post-it note on top of it, and now you have your deck. You can also do that in divisibles of 54 or whatever because you know it's all going to be printed on the sheet anyway. So like for us, we have 110 cards in the base game. But we talked to the manufacturer, and this is where it helps to like ask a lot of questions and not be afraid to look like an idiot. We said, we know you guys print on sheets. How many cards can you actually fit on the sheet? And they were like, well, actually we can fit 120. So we said, cool. So that means you guys can give us 10 more cards for free, right? And they were like, yes, technically we can give you 10 more cards for free. So we came up with an expansion, and we printed the expansion at the exact same time and said, hey, these are the 10 cards. Filter them out, put them to the side, and we'll pick them up later. And they did that. So thinking in terms of like, from a manufacturing standpoint, which we could do a whole other thing on, but there's a huge manufacturer here in Dallas. Cardamundi makes like magic cards, poker cards. Their factory is here in town. We use a factory in China, but they are here, and you can ask questions, and the salespeople will work with you and really tell you, like, hey, here's what you want. A good rule of thumb is, if they do it in another game, it can be done, but also pay attention to how much that game costs. So, like Cashing Guns has like all these foam guns and things like that, but it's like a $60 game or whatever. So like, while it's a cool component, you have to realize like, you know, somebody's seen that? Very cool. Any other questions? Yes?
So your Kickstarter, where was most of the cash going?
So our Kickstarter, this part's fun for me because I do the business stuff and my partner does a lot of game design stuff. So we made 102, 102. Kickstarter takes 5% off the top, and Amazon Payments takes 5%. So total 10% is gone for the credit card processing and the fact that you're using Kickstarter's website. So from there, we get 90K. We printed 10,000 copies of Two Rooms and a Boom. The bigger you print, the economy scale kicks in, the cheaper your per unit cost is. So our games were about $3.78 a pop. Plus we printed those extra cards and got them put in these nice little foil packs for the expansion. So our game came out costing us about 40K from the manufacturer printed. Then you gotta ship all that stuff over here from China, which is a nightmare. You have to learn about container loads. Everything gets put on like one of those giant container ships, and it takes about a month to get here, and then it takes about 3 weeks to get to your fulfillment warehouse. Ours was at Amazon. And that cost us probably another, so now we're down to 50K. That cost us another 15K for shipping. So now we're down to what, 35? And then we probably spent, then on top of that, we had to fulfill to our backers. So we pay to get it shipped to the United States. It gets put in an Amazon warehouse. It sits there, and then we upload a spreadsheet to Amazon that says, hey, these are all our backers, this is where they live, can you ship that out for us? But that only works for everybody in the United States. We had to ship to a warehouse in Canada for everybody in Canada, and then we shipped to a warehouse in France to a company called Idea Dispatcher who shipped to everywhere else in the world, because we had backers in, you know, everywhere. Japan, South Africa, Australia, all over the place. All in all, that cost us another 20K. So we ended up with 15K about left over. But the crazy thing is, while it seems like we lost a lot of money, we ended up with like 15,000, and after we fulfilled to our backers, 6,000 units to sell. And after we sell those at $24.99 on Amazon and take our cut, we'll have enough to go back to print 2, 3, 4 times over. So yeah, if you want to, the business of game design is different. If you want to design games. If you want to run a board gaming company, learn about business. Those are two totally different skill sets. It does help.
How many units was the board kit?
10,000. So we had 3,600 backers, and we shipped out something like 4,000 games. Something else we did right after the Kickstarter is we threw up a pre-order website. So now there's all these people that haven't backed your game on Kickstarter. In fact, somebody here played like a plaid hat game, like Summer Wars. So they just moved to Dallas. I don't know if you guys knew. The whole company moved here, and a bunch of them moved right next to me in Addison. But those guys are great, and we talk about like all this stuff so that we can get on the same page and just know what everybody's doing. The biggest argument Colby, who's the head of that company, makes against Kickstarter, because they don't kickstart things, is that with Kickstarter, you put all your marketing effort, all your marketing energy forward towards one date, your Kickstarter launch. And then it fades as you work on manufacturing your game. And then your game comes out 6 months, a year, or 2 years later, and everyone's forgotten about your game. We've been really lucky to have really great reviews, really great fans, and like be more embedded in the industry, but not everyone is that lucky. So that's a reasonable, realistic concern, is how do you generate this marketing buzz about your game twice? So we set up a pre-order platform to take pre-orders after that Kickstarter had ended, so that we can continue taking sales for the next 2 years, which created another, I don't know, 30,000 worth in sales by the time we had already shipped. So that was super helpful, because now it's like we raised 130,000 as opposed to 100,000. I don't mind being transparent about any of this stuff, so if anyone has any questions about this kind of thing, please let me know. Anything else?
Well, that's really neat, actually. And then we got this new breakdown like that. That's pretty cool.
We just got used to it early on because we, as like a trick, we ran a Kickstarter like a few months before for a documentary about us making this, which we've been editing, and we used it sort of as a way to get in the door with game designers and publishers and say, hey, do you want to be in this documentary? Can we interview you about Kickstarter? What's the hardest part? Who's your manufacturer? Where do you go to? How does your and it's just a sort of way to get some more intelligence about what we were doing. But as a result, we want to give back because the funny thing is, like I always grew up thinking about 5 times, I think they call it like profit margin. So our game is $24.99. But you guys know that it only costs us like $3.48 to make it, because that's what I told you. You would sell this to a distributor, and the distributor would take, or I'm sorry, let's go the other way because I can do the math easier that way. This sells at a store for $24.99. That retailer bought that from a distributor at half cost, $12.50. That distributor bought it from us for like 20% off of that, for like $10. Take 10, you subtract the 4, and we're making $6 a game for a game that costs $25 to make. However, we sell this exact same game on Amazon for $24.99, and we get $17 back because there's no other middleman. So being aware of your market, how you plan to sell it, what the margins are is going to be super helpful for you.
Pretty neat age of gaming we've got with Kickstarter and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of direct market things.
Absolutely. You could sell fewer games at a higher profit margin and be a viable board game designer for the rest of your life if you wanted to, just by going Kickstarter to Amazon, which is the great thing too, is like your risk is zero. You raised all the money, it's not your money. You didn't overspend it, so you've got some profit already sitting there, and now you have these units sitting at Amazon, and if they sell, you've made money, and if they don't, well, you're not really losing money either. But now as we're talking to bigger companies about getting into Target, there's a lot more risk involved that we didn't realize. But, yeah. Anything else? Well, cool. Thanks for having me, you guys. I hope this was helpful. It's super fun talking about this stuff. But yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate a few things, like he said, you've got to get in and you've got to play the games, to know the games, to be able to make games. So we're here for another hour-ish, and we're open until 10, so these are games that can be played in an hour. We've got tons more. Every game he's named, we actually have in the back. So I would suggest for the next hour at least, grab a game, read the rules, observe what kind of mechanics are being used, find out why it's fun, and just dig into it. I also want to note, Colby, who he mentioned from Plaid Hat, is one of our speakers. He'll be here in February. So we've got a lot of great speakers continuing as well, so we hope that y'all continue to come. And as far as the groups in the area where you can play games and test your games and that sort of stuff, we've got some of them listed on your paper as well. Roll to Play is a great place. Reaper, who makes minis, who's in town. There's a lot of great resources. DFW Nerd Night is a huge community in the area. So there's a lot of resources around. So if you have a question, ask me, go to one of these places, ask them, and just dig into it. So part of this process, and as he mentioned, he talked about a lot of people that he's worked with, and he talked about how you can't really do it alone. So we're suggesting that y'all either find groups or come as yourself and bring it back to friends and work as groups to work through these processes. So if any of y'all want a group or if you want to find people in this room, awesome, but we really stress that you work together on this process with people.